So, what are the exact values of the 6 trigonometric functions for the angle negative 7 pi over 6 radians? Now, the first thing you need to do, if you have not memorized this chart, you need to copy this chart down and use it on every assignment. Okay, so pause the video and copy down this chart right now, and I will assume that you have access to this at all times. Okay, so the next thing is you need to understand what the reference angle is for this problem. So for special angles that involve pi over 4, pi over 6, or pi over 3, those are the special angles. You can always tell just by looking at the denominator. If the denominator is a 6, that tells you that the reference angle is pi over 6. If it was a 3, it would be pi over 3. If it was a 4, it would be pi over 4. Okay, so the reference angle is pi over 6. That means that the exact values of the trig functions are going to be the same as the values that I would get from this chart, except for the sign. Okay, they could be positive or negative. Okay, so the sign, so let's look at the chart. So for pi over 6, the sign, okay, the sign of pi over 6 is 1/2. All right, the cosine of pi over 6 is radical 3 over 2, and the tangent of pi over 6 is radical 3 over 3. Okay, let's just double check that against the chart. Okay, 1/2 radical 3 over 2, radical 3 over 3. All right, right off the chart. Okay, now the only thing is I need to figure out whether these will be positive or negative, since I'm dealing with negative 7 pi over 6. Now, to know that, I just need to know what quadrant we're in. So look, since the reference angle is pi over 6, I'm going to draw a bunch of pi over 6s. So the top half of this circle is pi, so I'm going to split this up in 6 ways. Alright, so if I go like this, right now I've divided it into 2 pieces. So if I divide each one of these into 3 pieces, then I'll have 6. Okay, I divided it up 6 ways. That means each one of these pieces is a pi over 6. Okay, so I need to go to negative 7 pi over 6. Now, if I count around in this direction, this is the positive direction. If I count in this direction, this is the negative direction. So because I am doing negative 7 pi over 6, that's why I'm going to start here at 0, but I'm going to count this way. So here I go. This is negative 1 pi over 6, negative 2 pi over 6, negative 3 pi over 6, negative 4 pi over 6, negative 5 pi over 6, negative 6 pi over 6, and negative 7 pi over 6. So negative 7 pi over 6 is right here. Okay, this is in the second quadrant. Alright, so if I change all of these to negative 7 pi over 6, alright, none of these values will change except if they're supposed to be negative, I have to make them negative. Now remember that on the unit circle, sine is a y value. So the sine function is positive in the second quadrant because it's up. So I can just leave this alone. I can leave this positive. In this quadrant, cosine is negative, okay, because it's to the left. So this has to become a negative radical 3 over 2. Okay, now in this quadrant, tangent is also negative. Okay, and that's because tangent is sine over cosine. Okay, so in the first quadrant, the sine is positive and the cosine is positive, so that means the tangent is positive. But in the second quadrant, the sine is positive, all right, the sine function is positive, the cosine is negative, but a positive divided by a negative is a negative. So that's why the tangent function is negative in this quadrant. Okay, so that's it. So of course, cosecant and secant and cotangent are just the reciprocals of what we have above. So let's start by looking at the first row and seeing if everything is right. So as soon as I see something that's wrong, I'm going to cross it out. So sine is negative radical 3 over 2. No, it should be 1/2. So that means this stuff is not the answer. Okay, here we have sine is negative 1/2. Cosine is, oh wait, it's sine should be positive 1/2. Okay, this says negative 1/2, so I'm going to throw this out. Okay, this one has a sine of positive 1/2, so I'll keep going. Cosine is negative radical 3 over 2, which is what we have. Tangent, it says negative radical 3 over 3, which is what we have. So all of those are matching. Okay, now I'm just checking the reciprocals. Okay, these are reciprocals. These are reciprocals. Okay, look, real quick. If I have radical 3 over 2, the reciprocal would be 2 over radical 3. But then they are rationalizing the denominator. So if I do radical 3 here and here, that's going to give me 2 radical 3 over 3. Okay? And that's what they have here. And they're doing the same thing here. Let me just erase this. Okay, just checking the reciprocal aspect of it. The reciprocal of this would be 3 over radical 3. Then if I multiplied both of these by radical 3, that would give me 3 radical 3 over 3. But then these would cancel each other out, which would just give me radical 3. That's why the reciprocal of radical 3 over 3 is radical 3. So these are reciprocals of each other. So this is the answer.